I will tell you, imposter syndrome is something that, so I heard someone going through this, their perspective on things like depression, anxiety, stuff like that. And they talked about how instead of looking at depression or anxiety as an illness, that instead you look at it as a symptom. And when you place it in, and I was like, that completely altered, my perspective on so much stuff, because I was like, huh. And if you look at it like you would, because I asked this question, I remember even as a child when we had science class and we were studying biology, and they were talking about how the human body, when you get cut, your pain sensors go off, and it starts signaling to your body like all these things. And in my head, I was like, what a shitty thing to put into someone, like build them in. Like, I mean, if there's an entity that created us, what a crappy thing. Like, why give us pain? Like, why do that? And I didn't understand that as a kid. Like, why do we have this? And when I remember my science teacher telling me, he was like, well, it's not, yes, it's an uncomfortable feeling, but how else would you know you're in discomfort? Right. And processing that as a kid, I was like, oh, and thinking of it, then switching my perception of it to, this is an alarm system. This is something that's in place as a safety, somehow made me okay. It's the way the fire alarm goes off. It's heavily annoying while it's going off. No one wants it going off for no reason. Like, there needs to be an emergency if you're hearing that obsessive noise. Like, but doing so in a time that it matters would very much so save your life, wake you up out of your sleep, or take you to a place. You need that kind of overwhelming signal that goes, hey, something's really wrong and you've got to do something about it now.
Welcome to the EQ Gangster podcast, where you will learn practical tools to grow your mental and emotional health and intelligence to be the best version of yourself, both at work and at home. It is real, raw, and transformational. The journey of emotional growth isn't easy, but it's worth it. I believe in you. It's so great to meet you.
Yeah, same, ditto.
Man, I'm super stoked. I guess it's no joke. I'm chatting with a baller.
I love that. I wish I was a little taller than the rest of them.
Man, I saw your IG, and I was kind of going through your IG, and I'm like, man, you are no joke, Haddie.
Oh, well, thank you.
Yeah, that's amazing.
I love it. Most of my stuff is just jokes, actually. That's what you really see.
Well, but I got the vibe that you're super fun.
Yeah.
And I got the vibe that you're real, and that you're authentic, and that you're like imperfectly perfect, right? Like, it just seemed like, hey, I don't know, you come
I am
across.
really impressed that you gathered all that from just my Instagram. I mean, this really does just kind of dive us into the EQ portion of all this, because I'm like, you've nailed it. That's exactly it. I mean, it's not something that I intentionally try to project out there, but I'm like, you have summed me up, like if you could put Haddie into a trailer, that's perfect.
No way, that's awesome.
Yeah.
I'm super excited to just get to know you more and hear more about your story and the relationship between, storytelling and emotional intelligence, and what kind of your emotional health and emotional intelligence journey has looked like for yourself, especially being such a
front-facing
person. Yeah. I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but yeah. So, you're so in the public with all your news and media and all that stuff. I just thought that would be a super dope kind of way to kind of look at it a little bit. Feel free to just introduce yourself, Haddie, and just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. You gotta love the tell me about yourself question, right? That's a great way to segue. Well, I mean, professionally, I'm a national correspondent and producer. It's a majority of my background has been in lifestyle and entertainment, but I cut my teeth really in news a few years back. And prior to that, I guess my origin story is acting and film. And that's what I've always fell in love with. I've always been in love with TV and media and film, and just that anything that showed up on a big screen, I was just naturally drawn to from when I was a little kid. And I thought I was on my way to law school. I made several turns before I finally decided to really, really dive into, the career path that I'm on now. I always talk about my Pinsky moment where Roger Pinsky was this pivotal point in my life that shifted me into, from acting to hosting. He doesn't even realize it, but he plays a role in that. And so TV media has kind of been my realm. Storytelling is basically what I realized the reason why I've been drawn to film and acting, and because all of these have one common thread, tying them together, and that is storytelling. You're just storytelling using, different methods, so to speak, and approaches. So storytelling is something that I've always been just obsessed with. And I think it has a lot to do even culturally for me, because I'm North African, or my dad's from North Africa and Tunisia. My mom's from Sudan. I just say I'm extra African. And so storytelling is such a big component, even culturally, because storytelling is kind of like the foundational, I guess it's the cornerstone of where values are born, where culture is born, where you're able to pass down life lessons, and you're able to pass down history. It's storytelling is deeply ingrained in every aspect of our lives. I just think that now technology and media has evolved so much that everyone has become a storyteller in their own right. We're just all learning for the first time how to better tell our stories.
Awesome. Love it. Thank you for sharing all that. Can you share what were some of the emotional lessons that you learned, good or bad, positive or negative, coming out of your childhood?
Oh man, that is write a whole book on that. Coming out of childhood, I would say I realized when you talk about emotional intelligence, the biggest thing I learned was self-awareness. Like that's the foundational. Like I think with emotional intelligence is having self-awareness is kind of like the portal that allows you to turn and step outside of your emotions and look and actually and examine them from versus living in them and experiencing them. Growing up, I actually grew up pretty, like I was a kid that did, I was super sheltered. I couldn't go out. I didn't have a lot of friends. So I spent a lot of time alone. And ironically, I think that kids, and this is just a complete Haddie theory here, that people that have spent a lot of time growing up alone tend to be more emotionally in tune with themselves, I feel like, if given the proper environment. And I think it's just because you have nothing else really distracting you. So you kind of have to learn yourself first. But I would say some of the biggest lessons, man, I would say the understanding that the grass isn't greener on the other side is something that I came across quite a bit. And learning to be completely content and comfortable in my own skin. Because even culturally, and this is something I talked about quite a bit, was growing up, you're always kind of, especially as a girl, you're almost edited in a way, and you're almost expected to be edited in a way that makes everybody else feel more comfortable around, your presence. And so I think for me, one of the biggest things I learned was learning how to lean into my authenticity and do it fearlessly, because at first it stemmed from a place of rebellion. It stemmed from a place of like, giving the man, so to speak, the finger, going, no, I am going to be me. And I'm doing it in, to, kind of give you the finger to rebel against that box you're trying to put me in. But then, it matures. And when it matures, it gets to a place of you're doing it because you realize that you can't actually be your best self until you are truly yourself.
Ooh, that's good. Love that. Oh, that's fire. You can't really be your best self until you know your true self. Is that how you
Yeah,
said
until
that?
you've met you know what I mean? Like, how do you even gauge who your
Yeah,
best self is if you haven't met the foundational part of this is you? You know what I mean?
100%. 100%. That's great. Now, did you grow up in North Africa? Where did you grow up?
So I was born in Tunisia, and but I grew up in Fort Worth, Texas.
Okay.
So there's, talk about an identity crisis. Like I didn't know where I fit in anywhere because I've never fit in any box. I'm a minority within a minority, just because even Tunisians and Sudanese people that's not a common mix within itself. And so I never felt like I was any one thing too much, like growing up, I grew up, kind of in a sense, very surrounded by, heavily influenced, I should say, by my parents, like culture and like what's expected of me. And my parents were still very much so like, adapting. They hadn't adapted to America yet in this way of thinking. We would always separate ourselves from, well, this is how Americans do things. We don't do things this way. Ironically now, and my parents have changed their names and went full American, and they vote red. So I'm like, you can't get any more red blood than this. Like they really took a left turn. I was like, where were you people when I was younger? But
now, is that what you meant when you said you felt edited? Like where you had to is that what you meant?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say, in brown culture in general, like even with, Tunisian, Sudanese mindset, the predominant religion is Muslim. But the thing is we did not grow up Muslim, because my dad is someone who, he's essentially an atheist, right? So for him, his biggest thing growing up was he didn't enforce any kind of perspective on us one way or the other. The biggest thing he always pushed us to do was ask questions. He was like, ask questions, always ask why, and put it up against your natural, like, what your natural barometer of like logic and rationality is. And if it doesn't make sense, then don't accept it as truth just because someone is telling you to, but to really, mull over what you truly believe, and just make sure that the beliefs that you hold are ones that you've constructed versus ones that have been handed to you. And he was like, if you still find yourself in a, religious, then at least you've taken it through kind of your own personal, like, you've tested your own hypothesis, so to speak, to get yourself to say, yes, I do believe this. And it's not influenced by outside factors. And so for me, religion, plays a big part of it. And that's why I say I didn't fit in anywhere, because even when I got around like other Arabic people, and I got around other, people that had similar cultures, I felt like I didn't fit in quite with them. Right. But I would have to edit some aspects of I couldn't go out here just tell, using the word atheist was synonymous with being a Satanist at one point. I'm like, that contradicts itself altogether. But back then it was like, if you were an atheist, you also, worship the devil in some way. And I'm like, no, none of this exists to us, to what an atheist would typically believe, which is funny because even now my views have evolved even, since then. But back then I would say that I found myself edited just, philosophically, I would say, even as a woman, the biggest thing though, I was a tomboy growing up, and that was a big deal for me. Like I had two brothers, and I felt the need to really lean into like a hyper masculine version of myself. And it felt that because most of the time women just kind of culturally, and I think even just through time, that period of time, that decade of time, like we've evolved to what is the Me Too movement. We've evolved to just a different space in society. But back then, a combination of where we were and what we had accepted as kind of like the social norm back then, in addition to what my cultural, kind of constructs were. Being a woman was really tough. Like being a girl is really tough. Like you have all these expectations of you to be a certain way, act a certain way, submit to certain things, and a lot of it involved shrinking yourself, and growing up, I would hear so often, like, you can't be like that. You can't act like that. You can't respond like that. Like you're a woman. And I'm like, why do I have to carry all the responsibility of everybody else's feelings intrinsically just in my existence? Like, why am I responsible for this? And I used to rebel against it so much, to the point that I think that even me, when I say identity crisis, even finding my personal balance between the masculine and feminine side of myself to marry them to where they balance in a healthy manner, that still allows me to construct, healthy, balanced relationships. Like the dynamic between me and a male becomes a healthy, balanced relationship where I'm not having to, compensate for certain aspects just because, like I said, I'm editing myself. So yeah, I would say that editing myself in the realms of like who like version, like aspects of what makes up a person, right? Their beliefs, their values, the way that they present themselves to other people, the choices that they then make, the responses that they have, like all of that felt like no matter what, every chapter of it had some sort of edit that didn't come from me. It came from outside of me.
Wow, that is super insightful. I've never heard it said edited before. I've never heard that description before. I love that. And
And I think
man,
that's the TV part of me talking, you know
oh,
what I mean?
that's right. That's right. No, that's a great point. Well, because as you were talking, like, because I'm a recovering people pleaser addict
Same, yeah.
for 4 decades of my life, and just 4 years ago, I started on this emotional healing journey and growth journey where I'm not 100% healed from it, but I'd
I
say
don't
I'm
think any
probably,
of us really are 100% healed ever.
yeah, yeah. Well, and I love what you said. One of your posts on IG was like, and I really appreciate your transparency in there, but you shared like, hey, today, something like today I caught myself feeling imposter syndrome, even though, I'm very confident. I've been doing this a long time. And you're like, hey, okay, cool. Let it be a signal or a sign to kind of look inward and reflect. Okay, what's going on? And I just thought, man, that's great insight. Cause I just on my podcast, just a couple episodes ago, I talked about again imposter syndrome. And so I'm glad it's not just me,
Oh,
right? That we're
yeah.
all works in progress.
I will tell you, imposter syndrome is something that, so I heard someone going through this, their perspective on things like depression, anxiety, stuff like that. And they talked about how instead of looking at depression or anxiety as an illness, that instead you look at it as a symptom. And when you place it in, and I was like, that completely altered, my perspective on so much stuff because I was like, huh. And if you look at it like you would, because I asked this question, I remember even as a child when we had science class and we were studying biology, and they were talking about how the human body, when you get cut, your pain sensors go off and, it starts signaling to your body, like all these things. And in my head, I was like, what a shitty thing to put into someone, like build them in. Like, I mean, if there's an entity that created us, what a crappy thing. Like, why give us pain? Like, why do that? And I didn't understand that as a kid. Like, why do we have this? And when I remember my science teacher telling me, he was like, well, it's not, yes, it's an uncomfortable feeling, but how else would you know you're in discomfort? Right. And processing that as a kid, I was like, oh, and thinking of it, then switching my perception of it to this is an alarm system. This is something that's in place as a safety, somehow made me okay. It's the way the fire alarm goes off. It's heavily annoying while it's going off. No one wants it going off for no reason. Like there needs to be an emergency if you're hearing that obsessive noise. Like, but doing so in a time that it matters would very much so save your life, wake you up out of your sleep, or take you to a place. You need that kind of overwhelming signal that goes, hey, something's really wrong and you've got to do something about it now. And when you think of switching depression, anxiety into that, and then to me, I'm like, you think about imposter syndrome is no different. If you take every negative emotion you experience and think of them as like it's a functionality of any other part of your biology, right? It's like we have white blood cells that have a function for us, like, and we have there's inflammation, which is bad if you have a lot of it, but it serves a function when it does play its role, right? And it's life-saving. It helps us heal. And so if we kind of keep this mindset around the same negative emotions when anything that might be, because imposter syndrome is just, it's really just it's almost like if you were to, I guess, give it a solid matter, right? If imposter syndrome were made up of certain, hormones, I guess you could say, that when you're experiencing this, when this thing is released in you, that it stems from the family of fear, it stems from the family of insecurity, like it's made up of different other emotions that have mixed together to create imposter syndrome. And that when you understand it in this way, that then you kind of look at yourself and kind of do kind of like an internal test. I look at it when a mechanic looks at a car and sees this fuel in these parts needs to be replaced. This is a little low. This is a little high. Internally, you realize your system is imbalanced, and you're able to really look at it and go, okay, where am I imbalanced that I'm feeling this, that I'm in this state? It's kind of like, why is the car making this noise? And you just kind of pull the layers back to go, what's causing it? And it might be a combination of a few things. And I realized that for me, on a personal level and on a professional level, imposter syndrome did play a very big role, because me as a person, I naturally have very high expectations of myself. It's something that's been put on me growing up. It's something that I naturally carry within myself. And I realized one thing that I was doing that I didn't at when it was actively happening is I kind of scapegoated myself, in the sense that I know I have such high expectations for myself that I'm never going to be the one to be like, you did a great job. I will always be the one to find something wrong with what I did. No matter what, no matter if it was flawless, there's going to be some aspect of it that I will be able to find something wrong with it. So then what I did, and what I found myself doing to compensate for this, is I allowed or put too much weight maybe into what outside feedback would give me, to let me know, okay, this is good enough. This is good. And this is this is the kind of like where I put my reliance on, like that judgment of going, okay, this is the feedback I'm getting, so I know that it's good. And I don't need to tear myself apart so much. It's good enough. The problem with doing that, one, and as you know, I'm sure it relinquishes your power, right? Because now you are essentially giving up your power to someone else to tell you how good you are, or where you stand, or where you fall. And that's a really dangerous thing, because who really deserves that kind of power? You know what I mean? You'd have to be really selective in who you relinquish that to, and go, you know what? I'm going to give up my own barometer of judgment. I'm going to give up what my personal factor is to you, and let that decide how I feel about it. And that's what I was doing. And it's funny, because I'm like, when I think of it that way, I'm like, what was I doing? Well, why was I being so stupid? You're like, it's common sense, but I didn't realize I was doing that. I was avoiding my own judgments. So I let other people's judgments play a bigger role. And it taught me that the thing I have to do is I have to create a realistic and respectable set of expectations on myself. It kind of checked me to go, okay, you've got to ditch this mentality of you're going to be perfect or you're going to bust. Like, I have to start being more realistic with myself and going, okay, this is what I would deem my best work, and I'm proud of my best work. And I realized that a lot of my imposter syndrome struggled, like when I pulled back all the layers, I had a problem with being proud of myself. So I relied heavily on someone else giving me that to let me know, or give me permission to be okay with how good I was. And once I realized that, I'm like, no, what I need to do is just be proud of my work, no matter what. All right. Be proud of my output, or be proud of what I deem this is what I deem excellent. And then following that from there, and letting outside, influence or feedback or criticism be just that, something that I decide where it falls in my own analysis of what I'm putting out there.
Wow. That's great. That's great. The transition. Yeah, I love that. The transition of kind of wanting or needing that external validation into transitioning that from an external validation to an internal validation. of being able to say, no, 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 I don't need any external feedback. I feel very good about the work or the effort that I put forth. Could I have done better? Could it have? Yeah, maybe so. But I'm happy with the effort or the end result. So yeah, I love that. That's a great thought. How have you developed curiosity about yourself?
That's a really great freaking question. I think that's a philosophical question. That's one of those that like you can gnaw over a lot of different ways. Because one thing I've noticed, because I tend to be I naturally curious, but I've been that way since I've been little, where I'm like, I would say that my curiosity is something that has helped me in succeeding. And then when I look at other people that I find to be high impact people, to be influential people, Tony Robbins, Oprah, anybody that's really a high impact person, the one thing about all of them is they all have a curiosity. Like they're always in search of some understanding or some knowledge. And then when you pose a question like, how do you get that way? I'm like, you know what? I have no idea, because I asked my dad the same thing. Now, my dad, he was born and grew up mostly in Tunisia, in like the ghettos of Tunisia, right? So you think about like the ghettos of Brazil, like it's like a third world country, but when you talk to my dad, he speaks 5 languages. He left the country when he was 16. He lived in Sweden. He had a natural, I mean, it's one thing, I feel like, to grow up in the States, right, and not be religious or whatever, because it's a very individualistic driven society and culture, whereas back home it's like everybody is supposed to be on the same page, everybody's supposed to hold the same beliefs. There's like a cultural, societal like pressure that exists there that doesn't exist here. So for him to break even beyond that, you know what I mean, and go, no, I don't agree with the way everyone thinks here. I feel like I have questions. I feel like I have, and I asked him the same thing. I'm like, how did you do that? Because I feel like everyone is so heavily influenced and shaped by their environment. It's very rare every once in a while, but you catch someone that can take a look at their environment and go, no, I'm not a part of this. I'm going to step out of this, or I'm going to get better, And I feel like there's more, I guess there are more opportunities for that to happen in a country like America than there are for that to happen over there. You're just not, you don't have access to as many experiences. Like where you're born is where you're born. What your parents have is all you get. Like there isn't that, hey, you could create a whole different story for yourself over there as much. And so the fact that I'm like, that is the world you knew. How did you break that? And he's like, I don't know. I was just curious. And I'm like, that's, to me, I feel like that's a question that I would love someone else to dive into and be like, find out why that exists in people. Like, why does that exist in a certain subset of people, that it's just another level of curiosity. They have this strong desire to have an understanding of why and how things work. And I think people that ask why the most tend to be the ones that have a lot more, I guess, a higher level of self-awareness, or have a higher level, because you want to know why. And that's what I find myself doing. Like, why do I do this? Why do I respond this way? Why does this feel the way that it does? And understanding why more so than what always took precedence for me. And I think that when we do that as people, we can uncover so much, like, and that ties back to storytelling. For instance, and I was at a conference that I was speaking at, and there was a girl, and I was kind of giving them pointers on how they can pitch, to media. And I told her, there isn't necessarily like a magic formula to a good pitch when you send it to a producer, because what they're looking for is a good story. Right. And I was like, a story, when you think of like the realm of television, you got the 5 W's: who, what, when, where, why. Why will always be the reason why this story should even be told. Otherwise there's no purpose of it. And so I remember she came up, and I wanted her to just kind of get a feel of what it is to pitch media. So it was like, tell me, what do you do? And she'd said that, she's like, oh, I craft really great, like, workout programs, and it's like a really easy, like, simple three-step process to weight loss that she's kind of figured out. Right. And I was like, why? She was like, oh, well, she was like, I really like to help women. Why? Well, because I know what it's like, because I struggled with weight loss and it started to impact my life, and I lost my confidence, and it was impacting my relationship. And I figured out how to do this on my own, and now I want to help other women. And she was like, the more I kept, and I could have kept asking her why, and we could have went down a rabbit hole, and I think we might have ended up somewhere in her childhood. You know what I mean? Really, like, and that's what happens. You start digging back to, kind of what the Big Bang theory of all of this is internally in your story. We get back to the first day of it, right? And so that's kind of, you take that philosophy, and what we are is one big overall story. We're all connected. In my belief is that as people, we're all connected, and we're collectively a part of some large story that is unfolding. And within that large story, we each have our individual stories that are unfolding. And I think the quickest way to always remain kind of self-aware and self-reflect in a positive and healthy way is to always ask why, and not judge what that response is.
So, what is the importance of someone being aware of and understanding their own story?
Wow, I would say that it's life altering, honestly. And I can tell you something that I've experienced that's really changed things for me is having conversations with different different versions of myself. So to me, it's like, if you've ever have you it's like if you have you ever tried having a conversation with your 10-year-old self in a real way? Like, set this 10-year-old version of you next to you and truly have a conversation with them as yourself, right? Because the thing is I think sometimes we forget that we're not made, like, what we are in this very moment, in this very present moment of this second right now, is not who we will be in 5 years. I will meet Noble again in 5 years, and something, this version automatically is no longer in existence, right? Like, anything that's in the future or the past does not exist. You only exist in this moment. So when you realize that there is another version of you that exists in the plane of space and time, right? Like, there is another version of you that exists. That if you had a conversation with that version of you, what insights would be exchanged within yourself? And I realized that, as a young girl, I always I always was drawn to the strong female character. I was always drawn to the female fatale, the badass, the girl that, broke the rules and didn't care. Like, she was the strong feminine type, and she didn't fit in a box. And, like, I was just joking about, like, even the movie The Little Giants, Icebox, like, she was the tomboy. And, I realized I was always drawn to that. And it wasn't until one day I decided, I'm going to pick up the drums. I'm going to learn the drums. This was just last year, actually. And I'm sitting there, I'm in my apartment, I've got these little, like, LED lights going, starlight going. And, I'm literally learning how to play Beat It by Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson's a huge influence on, like, growing up for me. And I sat back for a moment and I just thought, if my 10-year-old self walked into the room right now, she would look up to me so much. She's like, who is this badass chick? We're like, she would be like, this is our apartment. We play the drums. You know what I mean? Like, this is what I turned out to be. This is awesome. And that you don't realize that you don't have that conversation with yourself enough, that how proud would the 10-year-old fucking version of yourself be right now if you had that conversation with them? And I think that having that conversation in an honest way would also let you know where maybe you could evolve a little bit, where you could be better. Because I feel like we really have it figured out as kids. And then we just spend a lot of time understanding that it's okay to be that person. Like we get sent out into the world and the world spends a lot of time telling us that everything about us isn't up to par, isn't right, isn't correct, doesn't fit. When realistically you weren't a mistake when you were made to begin with, and it's learning how to become comfortable with that instead.
So man, I love that, that comparison, that juxtaposition between yourself now and your 10-year-old self, or whatever age kid. And I remember, in fact, one of your IG posts was you swinging on a swing, and you're like, "Oh man, I wish something like, oh,
Yeah,
to
adulting
be a,
stuff.
yeah, right." And it's like I think that's where we can get out of balance in life, when we neglect that, our playful side.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And we just like, we I think that's when you die, but your blood's still going, your heart's still going, but like you lost a fire. I think that playfulness, that kid inside of us, I think it's really important to, man, to nurture that
Oh,
side or something.
absolutely. I really feel like the secret to like, and I'm not going to say success and talk about like that in that way. But to me, what I deem as successful is living a life that you can look at that's a full spectrum and fulfilling in every component. You know what I mean? And I think that the hack to that is really nurturing your inner child and keeping them present with you because they keep you in line. I feel like we know who we are as little, you watch little kids and they hit this certain age where you're like, that's a little person. You can see where their egos are, you can see where their fears are, you can see what they lean into, you see their passions. And then all it is a lot of life and experience that happens all the way up until then that you start to interpret as, oh, I need to make edits, but there's really no edits that need to be made. There's very few edits that actually need to be made to an individual. It's things that were edited without our permission that we didn't realize were happening, and then it's a matter of starting to look back and have that self-awareness and the curiosity enough to go, all right, how much of me is me and how much of me is family issues, trauma, environment, how much of it is original, programming and how much of it isn't.
Huge. Love that. I just did a bunch of reels on that exact same concept. What so now, what is the relationship between a good storyteller, which
Mm.
I think is important regardless if you're in TV or if you're not, what is the relation between good storytelling and emotional intelligence?
I think that, well, because to me, to define a good storyteller is someone that has the ability to impact or influence emotion, because that's what a good story does to us. It basically, if you take someone in a neutral state, right? This person has the ability to kind of turn the knobs to a certain setting within someone through stringing, crafting a story together that will push and pull and tug on certain things. That's why when you can watch Creed and you leave out of there and you're like, yo, I'm ready to start boxing, or you watch someone working out for 10 minutes and you're like, man, I really need to get to the gym. Or you watch someone, give a really inspiring speech and you feel like, and you get this, you watch physiology take place inside of someone through that. So an impactful story is one that has the ability to impact how you feel and whether, and or your perspective or your mind. So when you take emotional intelligence and tie those things together, I think being a good storyteller is someone that is become skilled in understanding how to orchestrate that. To me, I think of a storyteller as what a conductor is to an orchestra, but instead of music, it's emotions.
That's awesome. Love it. Love it. And I would agree. Like my favorite emotions, my favorite movies, or my favorite songs, or my favorite YouTube videos, in many cases, are those that evoke a truckload of emotions. And a lot of them too, you experience a gamut of emotions in
Yeah.
that song or in that movie or in that movie trailer, or,
Right.
yeah, that's great. That's awesome. That's
It
awesome.
links us. And I always said that, I'm like, it's kind of, you're a painter with words, so you allow people to come in. And I think that's another reason I tie in, understanding where to draw the line of imposter syndrome, because I think in people like, I feel like that are creative probably fall subject to this even more so than the standard person, because the way that I feel like I connect with other people is through through work or expression, right? Because I feel a certain way about this thing, and it invokes something in me that when I see that this same thing that happens to me, I have the ability to share with someone else and make them feel about, the about that thing the way that I feel about it, makes me feel connected to people. It's how I connect to people, right? So I think that, where we have to become more aware is when we realize, is this something that is actually the thing that I'm doing or pursuing? Is it really a form of connection, or is it a form of validation? And that's what separates imposter syndrome, is that we've stopped seeking connection and now we're seeking validation. And validation can sometimes come in the disguise of connection when it's not. It's feeding our ego. And so when you talk about connection, when I talk about art, I think that's why you would feel like, as an artist, you put something out there and it doesn't resonate with people the way that it resonated with you. And 9 times out of 10, you talk to an artist and they'll be like, yeah, I knew that was crap when I put it out there, because they didn't feel connected to it. Right? They just kind of put it out there and hope that my name is good enough to make somebody else connected to it. And you talk about like Eminem, for instance, he dropped a crap album and he admitted, like, yeah, that album was kind of garbage. Like I was just dropping it from a state of ego. I wasn't dropping it from a state of authenticity. And when you do that, it hits every time. There's a reason why, like, and you see artists, and everybody's like, artists tend to be a little weird, a little quirky, and it's really just that these people tend to be in a heightened state of connection, either to themselves or to their emotions, more so than the standard person. And then they have a portal or a method in which to put that, have an output for it, and then share that output and have other people feel that. There's a reason why sad love songs can hit you. You know what I mean? I thought I understood what love was at 12. Like, just singing my heart out to Mariah Carey. And I'm like, I know what love is. And how does that happen? And it's just a story within music, or the way that music in itself makes us feel things. And it all comes back, I think, honestly, more so to emotions. And if we can develop an emotional intelligence around the one thing that drives us as humans, is I feel like that is kind of what allows us to live an optimal life.
Man, awesome, Haddie. Can't thank you enough. I feel like I could talk to you for a few more
Yeah,
hours
we
here.
could really go on.
This is amazing. So how do we follow you? How do we find you? How do we connect with
Yeah,
you?
so I love connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm on that platform a lot more now than a lot of other ones. Also on Instagram at Haddie the Host, but I am Haddie the Host basically anywhere online. I got my website, which will be up soon, but it's under maintenance right now, but eventually you'll be able to connect with me there. But LinkedIn, Instagram, those are some good spots to go to.
Awesome. Okay, so last question is, what emotions are you feeling right now?
Oh my God, fired up. Talking about EQ always gets me fired up. I love talking about stuff like this. This is fun. And I think storytelling, because it plays such a big role, emotional intelligence and storytelling, I feel like you can't be a good storyteller and not be very emotionally intelligent, or at the very least emotionally in tune. You can't have one without the other. So I love this kind of topic matter. I would say definitely inspired and connected myself and to you, and this podcast, and the people listening.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Haddie. You absolutely rock like ZZ Top. Totally, totally appreciate your transparency, your realness, your own awareness, and the work that you've done so that we could get the version of you that we got today.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. I love what you're doing. You keep being an EQ gangster. I love it. We need more of you out in the streets.
That's right.